Sheriff David Clarke of the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office. Great to see you, Sheriff. So you know that this is the message that it's we need to get guns out of the hands of folks like this. But this guy had no record. You know, he was a vet. He was an Army vet, and I don't know. The rhetoric's bad, but I don't know that it caused this guy's behavior.
Megan, I'm sorry, but I'm still trying to make sense out of that babble that was coming out of the mouth of Jesse Jackson. He was talking about weapons that can bring down airliners. He's talking about surface-to-air missiles. Those aren't on the streets in the United States of America. That was a pathetic display of what he did. But look at the situation that we face right now. We have some very irresponsible rhetoric coming from some very powerful people. It is time for this nation to stand up with one voice and to condemn and shun this movement called Black Lives Matter. I would like to see the Southern Poverty Law Center place Black Lives Matter alongside those other hate groups that were mentioned, these black nationalist groups, the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam. It doesn't mean that those organizations will go away just because they're on that list, but what happens is people start to delegitimize these movements and marginalize them. This movement needs to be marginalized. We have looked at this stuff. We have peeled back the layers. We've looked at the data. We've looked at the research. None of their false narrative about the use of force, about the American police officer, can be proved. None of it.
But why, how would that have helped this?
Megan,
you know, because this guy wasn't part of Black Lives Matter.
It is time for, he said, according to the chief down there, Chief Brown, he was doing this in the name of Black Lives Matter. He said he wanted to kill white people.
The language was a little different than that. He did say the latter.
Okay, but it is time for the liberal mainstream media, the New York Times editorial board, the CNN, MSNBC, to stop walking on eggshells and giving legitimacy to these rants, to all this false narrative coming out of this Black Lives Matter movement. Once we do that and marginalize this group, then we can go about all the work. I listened to Loretta Lynch today. That was a great political statement, but nothing else. I don't need to be lectured to her about what we should or shouldn't do after this. I think she should have taken questions. Whenever you have an incident like this, somebody, the chief down there is doing a fabulous job of keeping the public informed. She came out, she intermingled this thing with some, you know, gun control, this, that, and then just, you know, took off. That was irresponsible. So once, you know, the rhetoric I don't think is going to go away, but we need to delegitimize this Black Lives Matter movement. We've had enough of their nonsense.
Sheriff, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Megan.
3 officers dead, 3 wounded in Baton Rouge. A really tough day for Baton Rouge and for the country, really. Here to talk about how to keep our police safe is Sheriff David Clarke of Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. He is going to be speaking at the Republican convention tomorrow night. Sheriff, thank you very much for that horrific day. I spoke to the heads of the Sheriff Department, the Police Department, and the state police down there, and they told us how their hearts were reeling. Their message is peace and coming together in the country. What's your message?
You don't believe that for 1 minute, do you?
That their message is?
Yeah.
That's what they said to me.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe them. Of
Any protests over the deaths of these cops today in Baton Rouge?
I don't know that. I don't know that.
Any riots or protests over the police officers in Dallas, Texas?
What are you asking?
It's a pretty simple question.
I asked you if what's your message to the people. Their message is one of peace. What is your message? My message has been clear from day one 2 years ago. This anti-cop sentiment from this hateful ideology called Black Lives Matter has fueled this rage against the American police officer. I predicted this 2 years ago. So what I want to know, okay, Sheriff.
Do I want to know?
With all due respect, do you know that this was because of that?
Yes, I do.
As a law enforcement officer?
I've been watching this for 2 years. I predicted this. This anti-police rhetoric sweeping the country has turned out some hateful things inside of people that are now playing themselves out on the American police officer. I want to know, with all of the black-on-black violence in the United States of America, by the way, when the tragedies happened in Louisiana and Minnesota, you know that 21 black people were murdered across the United States? Was there any reporting on that?
There was a black officer who was killed today, but
was there any reporting on that?
Sheriff, please, let's just keep the volume down here. So I understand, and listen,
I'm looking at 3 dead cops this week,
Sheriff,
and I'm looking at 5 last year. You trying to tell me to keep it down?
If you'll just please, we can keep it civil. So, because the message to people at home, I'm sure you want, is one of civility.
I wish, Don, I wish you had that message of civility
have a conversation
toward this
with you.
Hateful ideology, these purveyors of hate.
You don't know what my message is.
That's
what I
what
want
they
to say
do.
to you is
these people preach vile and virtue
in
the name of
We're going to go to break,
hate.
and we'll be right back. All I want to do is have a conversation. I can't have a conversation with you if we're both talking at the same time. What it sounds like to me is that you're accusing me of violence and supporting a narrative that I'm not necessarily in support of. And if that's what you're accusing me of violence, then you can leave. That's not true. I don't support violence of any type against police officers, against anyone. So if you're accusing me of that, then you're welcome to leave. But if you want to have a conversation, I am more than willing to welcome a conversation with you. I don't disagree with you about there's a narrative across the country that could be harming police officers. But we don't know right now, as someone who's in law enforcement, if that was the actual cause of it. Go ahead.
Let me ask you this. Do we know that generally the American law enforcement officers are racist? Do we know this?
Go on.
I ask a question.
Do I know American general law enforcement are racist? I don't think anyone is accusing. If you're insinuating that people are accusing or saying that law enforcement across this country as a whole are racist, then your assumption is wrong.
First of all, this whole anti-police rhetoric is based on a lie. There is no data, and you know this. There is no data, there is no research that proves any of that nonsense. None.
You'd have to be more specific about what data and what nonsense you're talking about.
That law enforcement officers treat black males different than white males in policing in these urban centers.
There is data that supports
There is not data.
No. The president spoke about it. Cedric Alexander, who is a law
The president has
enforcement
been
officer,
lying about it. He said it again the other day when he said black males are 2 times more likely to be shot by a law enforcement officer than white males. Don, that is a lie.
That is not a lie.
It is a lie.
Yes.
Show me.
Research.
Show me.
The research
Show it to me then.
that we have from the Washington Post. That
the Washington Post debunked that nonsense.
There's also research.
He also said
Sheriff,
this time.
There's also research.
He
from
continues.
A Harvard professor that also showed that black people are treated more aggressively by police officers.
No, you are wrong
people.
in your interpretation of that Harvard study, because I read the study. That's not what he said. He said he was surprised to find
that in shootings of the most severe in shootings, that he found no evidence that there was a difference. Also, it should be noted that that study was a very small sampling of police departments across the country. Many people did not find it credible, but it is also interesting that in that research, he found that blacks were treated differently when it came to aggressive policing, but for the most egregious shootings, he found no difference. That's what that study showed.
Well, based on what? Just generally? Are we talking about high crime areas? Are we talking about police officers being under attack? Because let's go back to where this whole thing started in Ferguson, Missouri. The lie was hands up, don't shoot.
You're lumping a whole bunch of things into one. If we can do one specific
That's
thing
where this whole phony movement started. It started out as hands up, don't shoot.
You're talking about Black Lives Matter.
Right.
Okay. So if you want to, you would need to speak to someone who is a member of Black Lives Matter about whether they have perpetrated a fraud on the American people. That's up to Black Lives Matter. That's not me. I'm neither a member of Black Lives Matter, I'm neither a supporter or someone who doesn't support them. I simply report on Black Lives Matter.
Do you condemn the anti-police rhetoric coming from this hateful ideology?
As a journalist sitting here on television, I don't have to condemn anyone, anything. That is something that you should ask. Other people around the country,
I condemn
their jobs to condemn
just like I condemn the hateful ideology out of groups like the KKK. All right? I condemn it. There is no place in American discourse for that sort of vile, vitriolic hate coming out of this ideology. This has fueled and fanned the flames of this anger toward the American police officer. There's only one group in America, one time, that truly cares about the lives of black people in these urban ghettos. And it's the American police officer who goes down there on a daily basis, puts their life on the line to protect who? Black people. So when you say we just want to have a conversation, let's have a conversation about the black-on-black crime, which kills more black males, which is more of a threat to any black male in the United States than a law enforcement officer.
Sheriff, yes, that's a different conversation. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's an issue when it comes to violence. Black-on-black crime, or it's crime. White people kill white people, tend to kill white people. Black people tend to kill black people.
Not in the numbers.
That's fine, but that's a different conversation.
I don't care who white people are killing.
That is a different conversation than police brutality, and we're not having that conversation right now. And again, I want to be very clear with you. I condemn all violence of any type, just for the record.
Was the situation between Mike Brown and Darren Wilson, was that police brutality?
But we're not talking about Mike Brown and Darren Wilson.
I am.
No, if you're asking me what the Justice Department showed, the Justice Department showed that it exonerated Officer Darren Wilson, and that the hands up, don't shoot narrative was a false narrative. That has been reported by CNN and by others.
That was another phony report.
What does that have to do with Baton Rouge, Louisiana?
All right, because when you take in rates of involvement in violent crime, and crime in general, but violent crime, you're going to see that black males are overrepresented, in terms of being involved in violent crime. That's going to mean more arrests. That's going to mean more people going to prison. This stuff has already been debunked.
Sheriff, that's a different conversation.
Every time you don't have a response to something I say, you say it's a different conversation.
I don't have a response to you. Is that we're having two different conversations. I'm asking the questions here. You're answering the questions by asking questions about some other subject that we're not discussing.
We're talking about this hateful ideology called Black Lives Matter. You said you're not a member. You can't be a member. It's not an organization. There's no structure.
That's what you're talking about.
Listen, I understand, and it is a hateful ideology.
I understand it's a very stressful time for you.
These individuals.
And Sheriff, we appreciate you coming on.
They preach vile and vitriol in the name of virtue.
Do you think it is fair to link this murder to the Black Lives Matter movement when we still don't know the suspect's motive?
I think it's very fair in light of the anti-cop rhetoric that is sweeping the United States of America, fueled by this group, some of the vulgar, vile, vicious rhetoric that's coming out, talking about killing cops, and that's just some of the nice stuff, some of the stuff I can't even say here on TV. But there is no doubt in my mind that the two New York officers, Ramos and Lou, who were gunned down by an individual who made Facebook postings about wanting to kill pigs, and he was going to go out and hunt officers down. There have been officers across the United States who've had their cruisers shot at and struck while they patrolled. St. Louis, the same thing. Yes, this is part of a pattern now, and you'd have to stick your head in the sand to think that this thing here wasn't fueled by this vile, vulgar, slimy movement.
Mark?
I disagree with your characterization of BLM, but I'd be curious to ask you, do you think that every cop who's been killed this year is connected somehow, the death is connected to BLM?
No, but there's an increase in assaults on police officers, the killings of police officers that may not be directly related to this movement, but you know what, there's no fear anymore about assaulting or attacking, fighting, disarming, or generally, like I said, assaulting law enforcement officers. And you know what? If the shoe fits, wear it. Just like the Dylan Roof, right, who went into a church and slaughtered 9 churchgoers and every white person in America by this Black Lies movement, L-I-E-S, was indicted because of that. And other people came out and talked about slavery, discrimination, alive and well in the United States. Well, that's why I said if the shoe fits here, wear it.
Right. I'm glad that you're saying if the shoe fits, because as a police officer, I would hope you would want to emphasize things like probable cause, due suspicion, investigation. The police officials...
Darren Wilson didn't get that, Mark.
Let me finish.
You know that. The officers in the Freddie Gray case did not get that assumption of innocence. So for you to stand up and throw that out now,
Sheriff, I haven't said... All right, I'll let you finish.
It's hypocritical.
All right.
It's hypocritical. The police officers in the Freddie Gray case didn't get that presumption of innocence.
All right, I've let you speak the entire
Darren
segment. Just let
Wilson
me
didn't
respond.
get that presumption of innocence.
Please let me respond. By law, we're entitled to a presumption of innocence. Even if you think that those people didn't get what they deserved, as a police officer, I hope you wouldn't say, well, two wrongs make a right. If anything, we should be emphasizing due process and investigation here. And in this case, the people handling the case in Texas themselves have said very clearly, we don't know the motive. So you're essentially saying that your colleagues in law enforcement who say we don't know the motive are wrong and that you do know the motive. The second piece I want to say is that your characterization of Black Lives Matter is absolutely incorrect. The argument of Black Lives Matter is not to say that police officers should be killed, that police officers should be demonized, that police officers should be marginalized. The argument of Black Lives Matter is that police officers should be held to standards of accountability just like everybody else, and the increased number of black bodies, or the sustained number of black bodies which die at the hands of state violence, needs to end. It means that while we regard all lives, we cannot exclude black lives.
What about the black victims that die at the hands of other black people? That doesn't seem to matter. And they're dying by the thousands, not by the few rare instances of the police use of force, Mark.